morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us, especially at this time of year. And for those of you unfamiliar with us, Brad and I are two of the three co-founders of EQNMT, with James being our third, our CEO and our fearless leader. And we are a wellness company dedicated to the elimination of unnecessary suffering. And the reason we do the work that we do is because we really believe that there are more tools available than are currently on offer to people to be able to deal with things in their lives. And so our offering includes not only all of the traditional tried, tested, and true methods of therapy and psychiatry, but we also combine these with novel, unconventional treatments ranging all the way from cold exposure to psychedelics. We're really trying to use every possible mechanism to help people live the most fulfilling lives possible. And that's part of what we're trying to accomplish this evening. And we're glad you could all join us as Brad and I present what we call a how-to guide for a happy, healthy holiday season. The best place to start, I think, in this regard is by looking at what the meaning of the holiday season is. When you start considering this period, it's one that most of the world goes through. So, in North America, we probably start earliest with the tradition of Thanksgiving. But wherever you are in the world, for the most part, we start all jumping on the train of this festive season up until New Year's Eve. And when you look at what it's meant to represent in terms of the various traditions and rituals we've had throughout history, the holiday season is often meant to represent a time of togetherness, personal reflection, gratitude, peace and goodwill, and a celebration of life and our relationships. And if we're really fortunate, this is the shape that it takes. But for many of us, you can find that it can also be a time of pressure, financial stress, loneliness, resentment, overindulgence, and for some, it's essentially just a month-long hangover. And we obviously know that very often it can be a blend of these two things. We've almost got this dimensional range occurring between these two poles, and we're trying to find a happy medium. We're trying to make sure that it's going to be joy and fulfillment rather than obligation and exhaustion. And what's ultimately going to dictate which of these we're going to feel, well, is going to be our emotional experience of it. And when it comes to understanding our emotional experiences, it's actually worth noting that this is where the word festive actually comes from. Festive both refers to rituals or festivals, but they were so called because they were meant to be celebrations of positive, joyous experience. And we've got to think a little bit about how we actually get there in the first place. So it's worth considering then what the nature of our feelings or emotions are going to be. If we want to feel festive, what would that even mean and how would we get there? Well, a useful structural starting point is in understanding what our emotions actually are. Now, for some of you, you may be familiar with this, and I hope you won't mind hearing it once more, and for others, you might not be aware. But very often, one of the most complicated issues human beings face is to understand what our emotions even are. And if I take, many people and I ask them, please define what an emotion is, they'll often say a feeling or an inconvenience or a hindrance or suffering. Very seldom do we think of our emotions for what they're really meant to be. And the best word to associate with them is messenger. They are information processes designed to help us. And often you can boil down the complex education that Brad and I were given into three quintessential words: need, emotion, strategy. So we all have needs. These are immutable, and they range from anything from our basic needs for food, for water, for air, for sex, for thermoregulation, all the way to our complex psychological needs. And what's worth noting is that when our needs are met, we tend to experience pleasure. We feel good. And when our needs are not met, our emotions tend to relate to unpleasant or painful ones. And if we're in a state of unpleasure or pain or discomfort, very often this means that we have to start a strategy. We have to engage in some behaviors. And those behaviors are intended to meet our need. If they successfully meet our need, our pain dissipates and we feel good again. If they don't meet our need, our pain persists and we get stuck into cycles. Why it's worth noting is because whenever you're feeling confused, whenever you're feeling stuck in your own life and you're dealing with a painful emotion, one of the most helpful things you can do is break it down into the simplistic formula to help reorient yourself. You can ask yourself, I'm feeling something really uncomfortable. What is this telling me about what I need in this moment? And when you ask yourself, what are my needs? Well, here are a couple of the basic headings under which our needs tend to fall when we think of it as a psychological level. One of our needs is for safety and predictability. Safety, both physically and emotionally, is often based on an understanding of a sense of control and orientation in the world. We have a good sense of what's coming. We feel safe in our relationships when we feel we're able to predict how our partners will respond to us or our families will respond to our needs. We feel safe when we know we've got a clear strategy or routine ahead of us. When things feel structured and orderly, we feel a lot better. We also have a very, very strong need for love and attachment, for emotional bonding. Many would argue this is perhaps our most important and primordial need. Very often we'll sacrifice all of our other needs in favor of this one. We also have a need for significance or esteem, to feel like we matter in the world and to other people. We have needs for seeking and variety, for novel experiences, for exploration, for spontaneity. We all have a need for play, to have fun and enjoy things in an inconsequential way. We have needs for growth, to get better, to diversify, to complexify our skill sets, our thoughts, and our behaviors. And we all have a deep-seated need for contribution, not only to receive from others, but to give to them in meaningful ways. And so what's worth noting is that when we're feeling emotional pain, more often than not, one or more of these needs is not being met. And our first step is to try and identify which need or needs aren't being met. And once we get a sense of that, we start learning what our strategy is and could rather be. To give you an example of this, you could kind of think of it this way, even though it can be more complex than this. Sadness, for example, could reflect a need for love, growth, or contribution. If someone is feeling really sad, maybe they're feeling lonely and they have a need for connection. Therefore, the appropriate strategy would be to reach out to somebody to feel more connected. Sometimes we feel sad because in reflection on our year, we think, wow, I haven't gotten to where I wanted to. I feel like I haven't developed myself. And the need is for growth. So our strategy becomes cultivating a realistic plan on how we're going to change those things in the year to come. Sometimes we might feel sad because our need was actually to contribute as a way of feeling significant. And our strategy becomes to do something meaningful and important for someone in need. Sometimes our emotion could be anxiety. And maybe we're feeling anxious because we don't feel safe. And maybe we don't feel safe because we don't know what's to come. We feel like we've got all this chaos, too many things, too many obligations. We don't know how we're going to handle it all. And so the need is to create predictability. Therefore, our strategy may become to plan and orient and strategize, to create a structured way in which we're going to meet all these obligations. And lo and behold, when we do so, we feel a little bit calmer. Very importantly, anger can sometimes reflect the need for love or for safety. Very often you'll hear someone feeling really angry and furious. And they think to themselves, why am I angry? I'm not just angry because someone wronged me. I'm angry because I need to feel protected. And so in order to feel protected, maybe they set up some boundaries. Maybe they become more assertive. And by doing so, they feel safer and their anger starts to dissolve. Why this becomes useful is it becomes a catch-all basic emotional model that you can draw upon whenever you feel stuck and disoriented. Because very often the nature of our emotional experience will dictate the quality of our lives, and certainly for our holiday season. Just checking these comments so I don't miss anything. Okay, cool. It's just AI telling me it's listening to what I say. That's great news. Okay. In saying that, one of the things that's worth keeping in mind is if we were to be feeling anxious, for example, what are some of the ways we can begin to deal with that? Well, to limit anxiety that comes with the holiday season, it is absolutely crucial that we develop a plan. A plan is important because frameworks are designed to create the certainty and control that we often need to curb anxiety. And the first element of any framework is to do the most important thing that we can do. Let go of expectations. In CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, we have incredibly creative ways of saying this. And we say the ways you let go of expectation is that you tell yourself you're not allowed to should on yourself and you're not allowed to masturbate. No shoulds, no musts. These are not helpful words because they induce guilt, shame, panic, and pressure. And we absolutely have enough of that during a holiday season. There's actually a branch of emerging psychology that argues that all emotional distress can be labeled as what's called an expectation disorder. And I mean, that kind of builds on that very old adage of saying, suffering is the difference between reality and expectation, right? So one of the ways is to try and change reality, but another is to shift your expectations. One of the most painful things for a lot of us during the holiday season is the expectation that we're meant to be overjoyed, happy, and grateful every second of every day. And that can be exhausting, that can be frustrating, and that can be pressurizing. What's worthwhile doing is stop telling yourself how you should feel. Stop telling yourself what you must be and who you must be and how you must be, and rather drop the expectations and allow things to give way to an authentic experience of where you're at right now. Simply lifting these sorts of things can reduce a lot of the suffering that we're experiencing and help us engage ourselves at a deeper level and get what we need out of the holidays rather than forcing ourselves into what we think it should be. So please, the next time you find yourself doing either of these things, smile and tell yourself to stop shitting on yourself or masturbating, and tell it to other people in your life where appropriate, which is probably never in all things. So in saying that, one of the things that's worth keeping in mind is a powerful framework often involves keeping a routine. Very often during the holiday season, we think because it's a holiday, we should just be spontaneous and just go with things and live in the present. And to a degree, those things are okay. But as many of us recognize, when you let go of a plan or a sense of predictability about your future, rather than feeling calm, you actually get pretty anxious. The idea during the holidays is to make a new routine, not lose it. So you can make your routine less demanding than it was while you were working or while you were doing other things. But having some predictability about what time you go to bed, when you wake up, when you'll exercise, and when you'll have commitments becomes a really helpful way of feeling calmer because you know what's hitting and you've got the structure that you need. One of the most important plans during the holiday season is finalizing your budget. One of the most common pressure points we experience is getting caught up in comparisons on gifts and expectation of feeling like you have to perform at a certain level or give this person what they really want and you have to go to every event. All of these things aren't just expensive in time, they're expensive in money. And the last thing we want is to be feeling resentful, hurt, and drained at the end, both emotionally and financially. And so it's really important at the outset of the holiday season to create a budget, buy what feels reasonable, plan it in a way that feels effective so that you don't feel drained and resentful at the end. A really useful one is also to consider planning your food and substance indulgences. One of the ways you can think about it is you've got to have the goal of not letting yourself be the before photo this holiday. Okay, we want to be the after photo or maybe even the during, but you don't want to go back to the before photo. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying yourself and getting to indulge in these things. But one of the things we often realize is that when we overdo it, we just feel terrible. It's keeping in mind that moderation is key. And here's a helpful hint from neuroscience that helps that. So dopamine, which is often associated with pleasure, is actually a hormone that doesn't just release when you do something pleasurable, it releases in anticipation of pleasure. So one of the things to keep in mind is that if you delay gratification, i.e., if you do something in moderation, if you have to wait for it, if you don't just overindulge, more dopamine builds up in your brain in anticipation of the reward before it gets released. Therefore, when you actually have the reward, it's twice as pleasurable. This is often why people who only get to eat pizza once a month love pizza much more than those who eat it 3 times a week. I say this from experience because this is something that I had to do. And it's worth keeping in mind. Spacing out the rewards, having to regulate yourself just that little bit, actually might make it even better in the end. What's also worth keeping in mind is that very often we feel overwhelmed by obligations during the holiday season. And as such, it's important that your plan doesn't include just the events that you're meant to go to. It should also include personal time and activities for rest. You actually do need to quote unquote treat yourself. You do need to make sure that you're actually getting days between family events, days between events, where you'll actually have a little bit of downtime to yourself to recover in between these various obligations, As much as they can be rewarding, they can also be draining. It's also worth keeping in mind that you should have pauses during these things. If you're going to be hosting people for lunch or for dinner or for something, you probably need to have little breaks built in there, usually pauses where you can breathe, where you can meditate, or at the very least, where you can have some quiet solitude away from a nagging aunt or screaming children, just for 15 minutes so that you can keep your composure throughout the event. A really, really worthwhile one is, though, don't stop exercising. As much as it's time for rest and relaxation, it's really important to remember that if you get 150 minutes of exercise per week, wherever possible, you'll find that this outperforms even our best antidepressants and therapists, according to research. So it's worthwhile keep yourself going. Remember, exercise doesn't have to be lifting weights or doing something grueling. If it means that you're dancing naked in the kitchen while you make breakfast, this will do. Whatever keeps your body moving is all that's really going to matter. While creating frameworks can be really meaningful and helpful in the sense that it creates the structure necessary to curb those horrible anxious feelings during the holidays, gratitude practices have also been shown to have tremendous benefit. In fact, some psychologists go as far as to say that gratitude is actually one of the most powerful and underutilized psychological resources. We often think of gratitude as a feeling, but gratitude is an actual practice that we engage. It's more like a verb. What you should keep in mind is that somewhere during the holidays, it is worth planning time to reflect on the good in your life. And not just reflecting on it, but expressing it. Taking time to tell other people how much you love them and what you appreciate from them. And very often it's about expressing gratitude and also doing something nice for them. Taking some time to reflect on these things can be a powerful psychological motivator that makes the hardship feel a little bit more worthwhile. What is very important, however, is that we often fall into a tendency where we start to lament occasions for what they're not instead of enjoying them for what they are. So maybe you didn't get the gift you exactly wanted. Maybe things didn't go exactly according to plan with the turkey that you cooked. What's worthwhile keeping in mind is don't get fixated on what something isn't. Learn to make the most of what it is. This is often what the power of perspective becomes. Because the truth is, if you can enjoy something for what it is, it's very, very difficult for you to have a bad time. And that's, after all, what we're going for in the end here. What's really meaningful, however, is to use a useful technique from cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps you break painful comparisons. Very often, because of the pressures of, what we should have and who we should be, we start making comparisons to other people in our lives at this point. But very often, we all have a tendency to make comparisons in a way that's unfavorable to ourselves. We tend to go, oh, I wish I had the bank account of so-and-so. Oh, I wish I had the spouse of so-and-so. Oh, I wish I had the wonderful things this person enjoys or that career. These can be really disheartening because, of course, in every direction we look, we can find someone who has something we wish we had. What you want to keep in mind to break these horrible comparisons is to teach yourself to have to take the whole and not the part. So what do I mean by that? When you find yourself comparing yourself to somebody, you have to force yourself to compare your life to theirs on every single dimension, not just the one you have in mind. So you're not only allowed to take into account their bank account, you have to take across everything in their lives. What's really intriguing when you do this is you'll often begin to find that for all the wonders we all experience, there are tremendous downsides that we all endure. And very often, when you take the whole instead of a part, you're not so quick to want to trade places with people. Very often, one of the people who learned to do this, which was an intriguing choice, was Elon Musk. He suggested that people often say they wish they could be in my position, but what they've never considered is what it's like to be inside my head. And when he gave a long recounting of what his everyday experience was, one had to recognize that for the benefits come some costs. And when you do this, you'll come to realize that there's a lot more to be grateful for in our own lives than we might realize sometimes. Finally, the most powerful gratitude practice is one that you might not have thought of, and I think is worthwhile keeping in mind. What research has shown us is that the most powerful form of gratitude practice is actually one where you ask yourself to remember instances where other people have expressed gratitude to you for something that you've done or something that you've meant to them. It meets our need for significance. And very often it reminds you of the worthwhileness of your own life and your own existence, and it makes you grateful for yourself, something that I'm sure you'll agree most of us tend to struggle with. So as much as you're going to be grateful for everything outside of yourself, make sure to try this technique of spending a little time thinking about how other people are grateful for you, because I think you'll come to see there are many more examples than you might originally think. In saying that, we've also got to keep in mind that the holiday season is one where we're not just focusing on ourselves, it's where we're dealing with relationships for better and for worse. Very importantly, the holiday season is a time that's for giving, but it's also a time for receiving. And so there are 3 really powerful relationship skills we hope that you'll focus on to make this a happy, healthy holiday season. The first of them is the skill of assertiveness. It's really important to recognize that very often assertiveness gets misassociated with aggression. And this is because aggressive people really like to call themselves assertive when in fact they're just being aggressive. So what's the difference? When you're being aggressive, that requires you to use your anger in a destructive way. You're shouting, you're screaming, you're insulting, you're swearing, or you're otherwise damaging another person. Assertiveness is not destructive. Assertiveness is protective. Aggression is a sword, assertiveness is a shield. Aggression doesn't require you to shout, swear, scream, raise your voice. It's calm, firm, and polite. What's worth keeping in mind is that assertiveness is a great litmus test for relationships. And the reason I say that is because we often realize that saying yes is part of a relationship. But one of the things that I often use in my own mind is to remember all great relationships are not based on the word yes. They're based on the word no. If people really love you and really care about you, they don't mind the word no. If people really matter to you and you matter to them, they don't mind boundaries too much. And very often we can bring the best in our relationships out by teaching the people around us to be able to respect our no's. So this holiday season, part of what you've got to consider is that you must learn JOMO, the joy of missing out. It is totally okay for you during the holiday season to limit unreasonable requests. If somebody is asking you to do something or attend something that feels just a little too much for you, that feels overwhelming, or you know you're going to feel resentful if you attend it, you're allowed to say no. And why you need to say no is not just because it's going to make you feel better, but because the truth is it's going to protect your relationship. Resentment, a unique form of anger and upset, that develops as a result of you prioritizing somebody's needs over your own. And that's okay to do once in a while, but when you're doing it chronically and severely, you become resentful and you become bitter. And when you get resentful and bitter, you've got 2 options. Option 1 is you're going to take revenge. And it's going to be something stupid. You might ruin something. You might accidentally, quote unquote, spill things on their favorite sweater, all manner of things. Or you're going to get frustrated and you're going to shut down and disconnect. Neither of these 2 actions are good for your relationship. The truth is, if you let yourself get into resentment, you're going to destroy the relationship later down the road. So rather than doing that, it's better to say no, even if that'll cause a little bit of disruption now, because long term, it's going to make the relationship a lot better. It is worth keeping in mind that you can also learn the skill of vulnerability. Being emotionally honest with other people can be our greatest source of hurt, but it's also our deepest form of connection. What everyone worries about when we're being vulnerable, however, is that we're going to hurt someone's feelings or we're going to cause problems. And that's where there's a useful and practical exercise that I'd like to show you that I'm going to ask you to practice in your own time with yourself with, I'm sure, many, many, many different examples that you can come up with. There are going to be many occasions this holiday season where you're going to have a difficult conversation with a family member somewhere. And why this becomes important is there is an effective means by which to do it. So the key here is to learn and master I statements, not you statements. When we make you statements, these often get misinterpreted by people in our lives as criticisms. They feel bad. But if you use I statements, which are meant to be about your feelings and your needs, rather than actions on their part, you find that people become a little bit less defensive. So whenever you've got something emotionally honest that you need to present to someone in your life, consider what you were going to say in the normal sense of the word, and then try the following. try and rephrase it by saying, I feel and I need. So for example, if someone's really annoying you and they're putting a lot of pressure on you, you could say, you're being so annoying, you're pressuring me so much. We can hear how that seems like a criticism of their behaviors and a criticism of their actions. That's going to prompt some defensiveness from them. But what if I were to say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. And what I'd really appreciate, what would mean the world to me, is I guess if I could have a little bit of time to myself, just for a moment. Why that becomes so important is that in the second instance, I'm pretty much saying the same thing as the first. It's a lot more difficult to get defensive though, because this time I'm not talking about what you're doing wrong. I'm actually just talking about what I need. Rather than inducing defensiveness in you, rather you actually create a sense of sympathy and compassion on the other side. So if you state your feeling and you tell them what you need, more often than not, you'll find people become a lot more receptive and a lot more pliable and willing to work with you. What is worth keeping in mind is you are not allowed to cheat. So you're not allowed to say, I feel like you're being an annoying dick. That is not correct. That's missing the point. You have to stick with your feelings, okay? So please bear in mind, as tempting as it will be, you cannot short circuit this one. But take a moment at the end of this and consider for yourself what some of the conversations you've got in mind would be and how you think you'd reframe them. You don't always have to say, I need. You can say, it would mean a lot to me. I'd really appreciate. But think about how you reframe it from sharing from your internal world as a means of diffusing a lot of the tension. But speaking of diffusing tension, there is a third category of technique that I think we can all benefit from. Very often, the holidays means putting friends or family members or colleagues together and realizing that they're not all easily going to mix. And so very often we'll have those controversial dinner time conversations, and we often feel trapped and stuck in the middle and drawn into arguments. One of the things that you can use to help diffuse these moments and make yourself far more comfortable is that you can teach yourself how to mirror and offer neutral responses. The reason for this is because rather than getting dragged into an irresolvable debate or a heated argument, if you learn to mirror, you can actually keep a conversation going, make someone feel heard, but not put yourself in a position where you either have to collude or agree with them or even disagree. For example, if someone were to mention something about a divisive topic like politics, and they said something really inflammatory that you don't agree with, you can just say things like, wow, that sounds really concerning for you. Sure, I can hear that makes you really, really angry. Wow, that's an interesting perspective. Tell me more about what makes you say that. That's an interesting idea. I'll give that more thought. Well, that's worth considering. Why I mention these is because all of these are what we call mirroring. You're talking about that person's thought or feeling. You're reflecting back to them what they're suggesting as a way of engaging the conversation. You're actually creating a way of making them feel heard, making them feel understood, but you're not putting yourself in a position of agreeing or disagreeing. You're not colluding with them, you're not enabling them, but you're also not dragged into a fight. And intriguingly, when you allow yourself to do this, you can diffuse almost any of these tensions, make it feel like a really pleasant conversation, and more often than not, by virtue of them feeling heard, feel like you can drift easily onto another topic without World War III erupting over the course of the festivities. 3 important skills that we hope might be useful to you in the course of the holiday season. Importantly, though, in managing our relationships, we also have to manage a relationship with ourselves, not just ourselves in the present, ourselves in the past, and ourselves in the future. Very often, the holiday season is the most existential time of the year. And so it is a time very often where we're looking back and we're looking forward. And very often this can be rewarding, but it can also be really distressing. So we do recommend the following for you over the holidays. If you're dealing with grief, as we all often are, it's worthwhile taking a little bit of time to plan how you want to honor your loved one's memory in a manner that would fit with them. Whether that's lighting a candle, telling a joke, reading a poem, doing a ritual, give a little bit of time of remembrance for that person in a way that's going to make you feel close with them. It's really important so that we feel connected. When you're doing your reflection on the year, remember, don't split. You are not allowed to categorize your whole year as all good or all bad. We must take the good and the bad and reflect on both. Very often in psychology, we talk about the power of ambivalence, allowing ourselves to hold both positive and negative feelings about something, because by virtue of that, we're appreciating its complexity and its richness. Very often, as much as we talk about feeling obliged and exhausted, it is also a time where we can also feel really lonely and disconnected. If you're feeling it, now is the time to reach out. Let others be there for you, and never feel embarrassed to seek out the connection that you need. After all, it's a time where we all want to huddle together. When you're doing your process, remember that as much as you're going to look back on the year, sometimes you might have regrets. Sometimes you might think things went wrong. Remember that as much as you look backwards, you can also look forwards. This is a time not only where you're going to look at what you didn't have, you're going to start creating plans and resolutions from the year to come, how you're going to achieve them in the future. And what's going to be most important in that is cultivating your new why and planning realistic steps. I won't go into too much detail there because Brad is going to give a lot of really helpful guidance. One parting thought that I want to give before I hand over to him is that very often during the holiday season, in our own reflections and in our own difficulties, very often we get stuck with feelings of guilt and with shame. And if sadness is about seeking connection, anger is about getting protection, and anxiety is about creating structure and predictability, what are guilt and shame about? Guilt and shame are often because we feel like we've let ourselves and others down. Because like most of us, we tend to have really high standards and expectations of ourselves, ones that we wouldn't dream of putting on other people. If these become overwhelming, the most powerful means by which they can be overcome is through contribution. Don't take away from yourself the opportunity to do just one nice thing for someone in need. Don't take away from yourself that one opportunity to connect with somebody when they need you most, because these can often break a lot of these painful feelings and afford the happy and healthy holiday season that you're looking for. Now that we've covered a little bit about how you'll navigate the weeks ahead, it's really worthwhile that we take some time to think about how you'll deal with the year that is to come. And that's where I'm going to hand over to Brad, who'll give us some really cool insights from his side on how we can do just that.
Well, as always, thanks, Anne, for that lucid and insightful presentation. Every therapist I know has an influx of new referrals, old clients return, and existing clients often say they feel worse. So it's our pleasure to offer you actionable strategies for navigating the holidays with equanimity. I'd like to begin by highlighting how Anthony's shown us really compellingly that emotions are messengers signaling needs. This is so valuable as it reframes our relationship to our emotions. Far from being pathological experiences we should eradicate, by listening to the wisdom of our emotions, we can adopt more creative and adaptive strategies to meet our needs for security and novelty, worthiness, love, growth, and meaning. But the challenge is that sometimes insight doesn't always move us to take action. Talk therapy or even a psychedelic journey can show us with renewed clarity that it's more strategic to be assertive over aggressive, responsive instead of reactive. Being vulnerable rather than avoidant with my partner is a better way to feel safe and connected with her. But what do I do if the prospect of being vulnerable is terrifying? How do I act despite my fear? Sometimes the signal from the emotion is so loud that we're overwhelmed. When I was training as an intern psychologist in 2013, on one of the wards, there was the kindest, most insightful, but very depressed man named Andrew. Everyone adored Andrew for his warmth and his bright, beautiful mind. But one morning I came in and the nurses were sobbing. When I asked what was going on, they said that last night Andrew took his life. When I called his family, who were distraught, they said that along with a note, Andrew left a one-page document with advice on how to overcome depression, and he wanted us to share it with the other people on the ward. It was the perfect distillation of some of the best wisdom for healing from emotional pain. But tragically, Andrew couldn't take his own advice. And so while many of us know what to do in the presence of uncomfortable emotions, we often struggle to do what we know. We're all drowning in information, much of which is powerful and accurate. But if all we needed was a better strategy, we'd all be, to paraphrase the novelist John Updike, rest at rich in chambers of bliss. Clearly, we're missing something. And part of our predicament is that we're governed by one of the most complex and mysterious objects in the known universe. The brain is so intricate that its pathways and connections almost outnumber the 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And unfortunately, this universe that we carry on our shoulders doesn't come with a user's manual. But our work with over 1,000 people has taught us that the bridge between knowing and doing is the emotional fitness or psychological strength to do the right thing for ourselves and others, whether or not it feels good. It seems Western culture places huge value on physical training, and we don't place as much value on mental training. We're never taught that since bad feelings aren't going away, the solution is to get good at feeling bad. Not to feel better, but to learn how to feel better, if you will. But how do we build this psychological strength? There are lots of powerful top-down or cognitive skills to draw on. The best have their origins in ancient wisdom, East and West. Buddhism, for example, gifted us the discipline of mindfulness, and contemporary cognitive behavioral therapy has its roots in ancient Greek Stoicism. Both systems train us to cultivate a better, special quality of awareness, giving us the ability to act despite our anxiety, frustration, boredom, or apathy. But the problem is that these top-down skills are really difficult to cultivate. We aren't born with the neural circuits for non-judgmental, present-focused awareness or cognitive reappraisal, the same way we're born with circuits for moving and breathing. And so Anthony and I have learned that the quickest way to build emotional fitness is through bottom-up or physiological processes. In this regard, neuroscience teaches us that the human body is constantly running a budget. This body budget balances resources to keep things working efficiently. Some behaviors, like sleeping and eating well, are a deposit. Staying up late every night and having 3 glasses of wine is a withdrawal. When our body budget's taxed, we experience what scientists call unpleasant affect. Affect is a rough and ready summary of the status of our body budget. When we're in credit, we feel good. When we're in debt, there's more unpleasant affect. In other words, we feel like shit. Seen in this light, sometimes conditions like depression and chronic anxiety are metabolic illnesses. They're signs of a bankrupt body budget. Our symptoms reflect depleted resources. Sometimes I'm not necessarily depressed. I'm just exhausted, and I'm misinterpreting the unpleasant affect of fatigue as depression. Sometimes eating a wholesome meal with a loving friend and going to bed early, in other words, making a huge deposit, dramatically shifts our mood. Why this matters is because the ability to listen to the wisdom of our emotions and adopt a good strategy to meet our needs mostly depends on the status of our body budget. When we're in metabolic debt, it becomes very difficult to communicate openly and vulnerably, or be assertive rather than aggressive. And the holidays can amount to a series of massive withdrawals, but hopefully some big deposits as well. And so we've integrated our knowledge of human well-being into a 3-part framework for building emotional fitness and regulating our body budget. We think of this framework as the high road to equanimity. It's like our cheat sheet for emotional well-being. Welcome to the Pyramid of Wellbeing. And as you can see, there are 3 core domains: the biological, psychosocial, and the cognitive, or if you like, spiritual or existential domain. And the pyramid isn't only valuable for how we live our lives day to day, but for coping through all of life's vicissitudes, such as trauma, loss, a difficult adjustment, and of course, the holiday season. And indeed, the foundation of well-being is the biological layer. The quickest way to ensure our body budget's in credit is really by doing what our mothers tried to get us to do when we were kids: eat our veggies, go outside and play instead of sit in front of the TV all day, and go to bed early. Quite simply, there's no emotion regulation without physical health, irrespective of how much psychedelic-assisted therapy, meditation, or breath work we do. The state of our minds just is the integrity of our bodies. And sleep, nutrition, and exercise are the golden triad of well-being. But sleep truly is the foundation. It's like the Swiss Army knife of health. As Professor Matthew Walker says, if it didn't provide a remarkable set of benefits, then it's the biggest mistake evolution has ever made. There's truly no aspect of our biology that's left unscathed by sleep deprivation. And indeed, studies across millions of people show that short sleep predicts a short life. It's also nature's most potent antidepressant, the closest thing to a panacea for our emotions. Dream sleep, in particular, provides a fascinating neurochemical balm where trauma and distress are uncoupled from memory. It's no wonder that psychedelic medicine is such a potent catalyst for healing. Intriguingly, the neural signature of a psychedelic journey looks very much like REM sleep and is often referred to as a wakeful dream. But considering things like jet lag, late nights, and late mornings, the holidays are perfectly engineered to wreak havoc with our circadian rhythms. So to help protect your sleep, your survival kit that we've included as a gift for you at the end includes 12 actionable principles for healthy sleep based on the wonderful work of Oxford neuroscientist Matthew Walker. We've also included a link to an app called Time Shifter, which will help prevent jet lag if you're traveling by giving you tailor-made recommendations for when to view sunlight, drink coffee, nap, and sleep based on your itinerary and your circadian rhythm. It's brilliant and has saved Anthony and I from being dysfunctional after many trips from South Africa to Jamaica to run our retreats. But nutrition and substances are the other master key. There's overwhelming evidence that nutrient-rich food reduces depression and anxiety and enhances focus. Adjusting the notorious Western diet, excessive red and processed meat, high-fat dairy, refined grains, copious sugar and salt, to include more plant-based proteins and fish, is a potent elixir for our emotions. And this regimen aligns with the diet of the centenarians in longevity hotspots around the world who have significantly lower levels of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. As the author Michael Pollan says, if it came from a plant, eat it. If it was made in a plant, don't. His nutritional triptych cuts right through the noise. He advises us to eat food, in other words, whole food, not too much, mostly plants. But during the holidays, things like binge eating and excessive alcohol and drug consumption are significant challenges. To manage this, stay tuned for our discussion on healthy habit formation coming up in a moment. And thirdly, exercise. All animals move to regulate their body budget. If a mammal's glucose levels skyrocket, scampering up a tree will bring it down. Of course, humans are unique in that we're the only animals who can regulate emotion using top-down cognitive strategies only, like mindfulness and cognitive reappraisal. But when this fails, and it often will, remember you're an animal. Move, even if you don't feel like it. Exercise also reduces risk of cancer by 40%, stroke by 45%, and diabetes by 50%. Intriguingly, muscle mass has been shown to be as important as blood pressure and weight in determining overall health, causing some scientists to argue that muscle mass should be a new vital sign. Exercise also releases dopamine, serotonin, and endogenous cannabinoids that make us feel fantastic. In some instances, it's been shown to be more effective than medication in managing depression. But if you're traveling or don't have access to your training spaces, there's no reason to be sedentary. Just follow 2 time-honored principles. As Anthony suggested, move for at least 20 minutes a day and try have fun doing it. We'll talk about habit coupling in a moment, which will show you how you can make it enjoyable as well. Climbing the pyramid, the psychosocial layer underscores our social needs. Psychoanalysts since Freud have said that what matters most for well-being are love, work, and play. It's within these 3 areas that most of our deepest needs are met or unmet. Now, unless you're Buddha, it's almost impossible to regulate your emotions if there's perpetual chaos in these areas. It's been said that the best thing for a human nervous system is another person, and the worst thing for a human nervous system is another person. Nothing regulates or dysregulates us quicker than our relationships. As the Harvard psychologist turned spiritual guru, Richard Alpert, aka Ramdas, said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. And as Anthony's shown us, the holidays forcefully underscore this truth. It's difficult to be vulnerable and assertive with family and friends, but these boundaries are crucial and need not threaten the loving, connected bonds we also desperately need. These bonds truly are our only protection against what some existential philosophers call the primal panic of existence. The astronomer Carl Sagan put it beautifully when he said, for small creatures such as we, this vastness is only bearable through love. And of course, Harvard University's longest ever study on human happiness shows that fulfilling relationships consistently predict happiness far more than professional success, wealth, or status. But unfortunately for many, the holidays are also a time of profound and agonizing loneliness. There was a journalist named Jimmy Cannon who said that Christmas is a holiday that persecutes the lonely. And studies show that loneliness causes our cortisol levels to soar. It can be as injurious to the nervous system as being physically attacked, which is remarkable. Fortunately, there are lots of creative ways to practice connection during the holidays, and we've included a long list of ideas in your holiday survival kits. But we also spend 1/3 of our lives working. Financial strain and lack of stability, autonomy, and fulfillment in work really vitiates our body budget. It's one of the biggest contributors to our epidemic proportions of depression, anxiety, and addiction. And polls show that financial concerns were cited as the #1 cause of stress during the holidays, with 58% of Americans saying they spend too much or don't have enough money during this period. So be realistic and budget for essentials, but more importantly, relinquish perfectionism and pressure, something we'll explore further shortly. And lastly, all mammals play. That is, they do something because the experience itself is more rewarding than the outcome. Regular play lowers stress, boosts mood, and increases creativity. The great dramatist George Bernard Shaw was right when he said, "We don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing." While the holidays may afford more time for play, the pressure to be happy and celebrate, the forced gaiety, and the problem of post-celebration blues can make play a complex and conflicted phenomenon during the holidays. So try celebrate your way, or don't celebrate at all. Try create a holiday that looks the way you want it to look. And to prevent post-celebration come down, it's useful to appreciate that dopamine will always plummet after a spike. It's the law of psychological gravity. What goes up must come down. So to soften a come down, don't fly too high, don't celebrate too hard, don't expect or chase high levels of dopamine. Try to attach reward to the process of being rather than a transitory result or feeling of euphoria. Crucially, after a celebration, sleep, move, and eat well. Your survival kit also includes a list of key aftercare vitamins and supplements that will help replenish your neurochemistry after a big night. And finally, the cognitive or meaning-making layer. Even if we take care to regulate our biological and social needs, we still have to contend with a brain that hasn't evolved to make us happy, but rather to keep us alive. As it happens, worry and rumination are great survival strategies. And research into the science of happiness outlines 4 annoying features of the evolved mind that make us miserable. The bad news is that the holidays can be fertile ground for these features to metastasize. The first is miswanting. It's our tendency to pursue things that don't actually make us happy and fulfilled, like a bigger home or a faster car or a fancier hotel room. Second, comparison, our annoying tendency to constantly evaluate ourselves against others, leaving us feeling empty and worthless. Mostly fueled by social media, comparison is rampant during the holidays, as we're inundated with highlights of other people's vacations and experiences. Social media use increases by 73% during this period. And given the correlation between excess social media and depression and anxiety, it's no wonder that so many of us feel worse during the holidays. The third is impact bias. It's our tendency to overestimate how happy something will make us once we get it. The holidays can exacerbate this distorted thinking. We might tell ourselves, this is going to be the best trip of my life. Whenever we test these assumptions, we're disappointed. As the English comedian Tim Vine said, "I've just been on a once-in-a-lifetime holiday, and I'll tell you what, never again." So it's wise to temper expectations by not attaching too much dopamine to the idea of arriving somewhere or getting something. And finally, this problem of hedonic adaptation, the annoying way we desensitize to the pleasure something initially gives us. So to enjoy beautiful states of consciousness like equanimity, gratitude, awe, love, and curiosity, we have to train the mind to be present, to savor, to learn to notice what's good and available, not just what's wrong and missing. Of course, these are some of the gifts of mindfulness. But data suggests that finding ways to contribute is the most powerful response to these 4 features. Simply put, when our thinking is mostly other-oriented during the holidays, we're happier and calmer. So nurture your spirit by pursuing meaning through contribution. The poet Eva K. Lowe captures this intention beautifully when she says, "A holiday candle is a lovely thing. It makes no noise at all, but softly gives itself away. While quite unselfish, it grows small. And to manage perfectionism and social pressure, take note of some important research findings. No one will remember your perfect gift, perfect house, or the perfect meal you cooked. So it makes sense to reframe your objective to good enough. And as Anthony mentioned, we can heed the wisdom of the late giant of cognitive therapy, Albert Ellis, who said, "Stop shooting on yourself." But of course, the significance of meaning making lies mostly within the thorny tradition of trying to set New Year's resolutions. Our tendency to use temporal landmarks as motivation is called the fresh start effect. But as it's been said, a New Year's resolution is something that goes in one year and out the other. And unfortunately, the data supports this. Only 8% of us maintain them, and they're usually abandoned by the third week of January. A recent poll found that the most common resolutions for 2024 are improve fitness, finances, and mental health, weight loss, and improved diet. Intriguingly, by the 21st of January, 92% of us will have failed at realizing these. And this isn't because we're insincere in our desire for change. We simply lack insight into the neuroscience of goal setting and the formation of habits to get us there. We mostly try to rely on motivation to change, but I often think of motivation as an unreliable friend. It's never there when you need it and often shows up when you don't. Habits and rituals succeed where willpower inevitably fails. And there are copious myths about goal setting and habit formation. Unfortunately, post-its on your fridge don't work because your nervous system adapts to your environment. And neither does telling people about your goals in the hopes of triggering accountability pressure. When we do this, we often get feedback that activates reward systems in the brain, which actually demotivates us. So what does science say about identifying and keeping New Year's resolutions? Well, firstly, only one resolution at a time. As our list of goals expands, the probability of achieving any of them diminishes. So pick one that's most meaningful. But more important than what is why. Why do you want to get healthy? What would starting therapy mean for you? Why deepen intimacy with your spouse? We lose momentum when we smash into obstacles because we're too focused on strategy, the how, and not enough on psychology, the why. In fact, some research suggests that 80% of change depends on our psychology, while only 20% has to do with strategy. So when not changing begins to feel repugnant and the prospect of change becomes emotionally compelling, then we drop the hammer and act. We break through what neuroscientists call limbic friction, the internal resistance we all feel when trying to override rigid neural circuits. In your survival kit, we've shared a powerful tool called the 4 quadrants. It'll help you identify why your New Year's resolution matters to you and what's at stake if you abandon it. The 4 quadrants will be like your North Star, orienting you and pulling you forward when the process becomes cumbersome. But thirdly and crucially, make it specific by assigning verbs and timeframes to your goal. For example, replace "I want to get fit" with "I want to take a brisk walk for 30 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday." Specificity and measurability are key in setting and achieving your goals. It's interesting to consider why we tend to keep our goals hazy and broad and vague. The truth is, it's a defense mechanism. It shields us from the pain of knowing when we're off course. But to grow, we need to risk this pain by emblazoning our true north in bright mental colors, so we always know when we're knocked off course. There's discomfort either way, but we have to pick our poison. The pain of knowing we've strayed so we can course correct, or the more existential pain of regret. And fourth, make it easy and convenient to achieve your goal. Apply the principle of small things often. If you're a first timer, don't try meditate for 30 minutes a day, lift weights for an hour, and definitely don't jump straight into an ice bath unless you're foolish enough to come on one of our retreats. The pain and frustration of overreaching will make the idea of doing it again unbearable, and it won't last. End with a sense of confidence so repetition becomes attractive. And to make it enjoyable rather than just manageable, use habit coupling. Pair something you don't like with something you do. Stretch while watching a series, lift weights while listening to a podcast, meditate with music, walk with your dogs. By the same token, remove obstacles. For most of us, the biggest obstacle to getting something done are our smartphones, or as they've been dubbed, weapons of mass distraction. Don't let it hijack your attention. It's a sobering thought that most of us need to put more boundaries between us and our smartphones than with any particular person in our lives. And 5, also make sure you activate your procedural memory. Visualize all the steps involved in starting and finishing the new habit. For example, if you want to get to the gym regularly, visualize putting on your trainers, packing your bag, getting in the car, working out, coming home, and having a warm shower. Amazingly, this primes the very same brain circuits needed to actually perform the habit, reducing limbic friction. 6, use the principle of random reward. For sustained motivation, we need dopamine. If you reward yourself every time you hit a milestone, you'll desensitize to the reward and your dopamine will plummet. You'll lose momentum. Instead, leverage dopamine with random rewards. Studies have shown that after every milestone, when participants flip a coin, heads they celebrate, tails they don't. They sustain their new habit significantly longer than the control group. So the key is to attach reward to the process of pursuit, the journey, the struggle, rather than the end result. Tell yourself that the good part is the effort. And finally, use habit bracketing by following the circadian rhythm of attention and motivation. We have the most drive 30 minutes, 3 hours, and 11 hours after waking up. So take advantage of this by timing your new habit along one of these energy spikes. And now allow me to seemingly contradict everything I've just said with a final data point. Achieving your goals won't actually make you happy. So why bother? Because the kind of person we become by virtue of working towards a goal most certainly can. So once again, attach reward to the process and not the outcome. In closing, we'd like to extend an invitation to make space for ambivalence during the holidays. Our culture of forced gaiety fails to recognize how complex and nuanced this time of year can be, how bittersweet it is, how shot through with melancholy it can be. Some people grew up in homes where Thanksgiving was a time of drunkenness and domestic violence. We may have associations of trauma, grief, and loss as we remember our last Christmas or Hanukkah with a loved one who's passed. In the spirit of listening to our emotions as messengers, grieve, cry with a loved one if you need to, journal, talk to your therapist, draw on the power of ceremony and ritual in honor of someone who's passed. Immerse in film, music, and art that speaks to you. Be where you are. Here, the principle of equanimity, neither clutching at pleasure and joy or repelling pain, truly shines. The holidays really are the perfect time to appreciate that nothing lasts, neither our bad times nor our good times. This is the ambivalence of the season, and we encourage you to embrace it. And with that, I will thank you for your indulgence. And just before we head into some Q&A, here is a QR code for you to claim your free gift. Just point your camera at the code and follow the link that appears. And if you have any difficulty, just leave your name in the comments and we will email you the PDF of your holiday survival kit.